The next item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number S4M 05789 in the name of Mary-Fee on using prisoners' assets to reduce reoffending. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. Ms Fee, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am delighted to be holding my first members' debate on a topic I have raised on numerous occasions in this Parliament and a topic I feel very strongly about. But before I move on to the substance of my speech, I'd like to thank a couple of people before I get started. Can I thank Dr Nancy Laux, Charlie Martin, members of the cross-party group on families affected by imprisonment, and offenders and families I have met for their assistance in researching the debate. And also a special thanks to Gareth Brown, Dan Cairns and Lucy Connolly for their tireless research and support in these matters. Presiding Officer, without the support and help of these people, I doubt we would be having this debate just now and bringing focus on issues around supporting families and offenders, which aim to develop new ideas about reducing reoffending. As the motion title suggests, I have a different ideology about how we reduce reoffending. All prisoners have assets, not financial or material, but anything from educational qualifications and work experience to hobbies and interests and to family and friends. As one prison officer put it to me, at some point, someone, a mother, a father, or loved and cared for the offender. But how do we recreate that bond? And I accept that some families break down for different reasons, which lead to bonds being broken. But where there is still a chance for that relationship to work, then we must utilise that asset for the interest of the offender, their family and society. Research shows that supporting families, as well as working with the offender, helps to break the cycle of offending. And not only does it keep the offender out of prison in the future, it can support the children of offenders, who are statistically more likely to end up in a life of crime themselves. Presiding Officer, children of prisoners are a group within society often overlooked, even though more children will face a parent's imprisonment than parents' divorce. These are silent victims, and as I repeat, a group in society which are more likely to enter the criminal justice system. A study from the University of Cambridge in 2007 by Joseph Murray found that parental imprisonment predicted a boy's own antisocial behaviour through their life course, and their mental health problems, in some cases, continuing well into adulthood, even up to the age of 48. The same study found that 48% of boys separated from a parent due to imprisonment between birth and 10 years ended up in prison as an adult. So the need to look at families as an asset and maintain bonds can play a crucial part in reducing reoffending. The motion debated here also welcomes the investment of £70,000 in a pilot through care programme in HMP Greenock. Effective and well-established through care is an essential service if reoffending is to be tackled. At a recent meeting with ex-offenders in Glasgow, I heard about the lack of joined-up working between different agencies that should be better at supporting newly released prisoners. And one of the men also stated that through care should start as soon as anyone's sentence enters the prison estate. Another major issue that came out of my time with the ex-offenders was the lack of meaningful activity in prison. Over the last month or so, I have highlighted some concerns I have with purposeful activity, concerns around incentivising activity, joined-up working, and the purpose of the activity itself. And crucially, that's what my motion aims to address and highlight. Are prisoners being offered work or educational courses that suit their needs, which utilise the skills they possess and improve the knowledge many prisoners have? Presiding Officer, it has been said to me more than once that some prisoners are often some of the most entrepreneurial people you could meet, and I don't doubt that for a minute. But how can we then use that lawfully and for the benefit of the offender? Creating a system of meaningful activity around the assets of prisoners is seen as a costly process. Yet look at what reoffending costs Scotland, both socially and economically. In fact, one ex-offender I met who had previously worked in finance ended up in an art class, as that was all they had to offer. How is that best working with the prisoner to rehabilitate them? I'm sure that's not an isolated case, but given this offender had financial qualifications and the majority of the prison population have trouble around reading, writing and numeracy, wouldn't utilising their assets actually benefit other prisoners as much as it would benefit the offender themselves? While I'm touching on the subject of mentoring, I would like to welcome the funds announced by the Scottish Government to establish a national network of mentoring schemes. Witnessing the work that the WISE Group carry out through their Roots Out of Prison project, I'm delighted that they can carry on with their good work. Having visited some prisons, I've seen at first hand the terrific work that's undertaken to give prisoners work experience. In Greenock Prison, I was interviewed for the prison radio by a young man who had never thought about sitting in front of a microphone before. And I was extremely impressed at the questions he posed on the spot and how he took to questioning a politician. Taking part in the course had started a passion for him, and listening to this bright young man, I could hear how he wanted to change and better himself, yet never thought he could. Projects that give confidence to an offender are required and essential in order for someone to turn their back on offending, as long as all the other dots are joined up. Everyone has a history and a story to tell, Presiding Officer, and how we tap into those positive aspects of someone's background can offer change to that person and their community. A greater holistic approach is essential for a population with all manner of mental health problems. I can imagine right-wing types in their press will view this approach as a hug-a-hoodie type, soft justice, but we know the current system isn't working. When the country spends £128 million per year on reducing reoffending, which then costs us £3 billion, we have to look at other means of how we tackle a crisis that affects families and communities across my region and the country as a whole. And I do hope that the points and concerns I've raised can feed into our justice system, and I look forward to hearing from other members today. And I would also like to add that this debate is only a small part to what the cross-party group on families affected by imprisonment set out to achieve, and I hope many of you will consider coming and feeding back to the members your ideas about how we support families on the outside. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now call on Sandra White to be followed by Lewis MacDonald. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I congratulate Mary-Fee on this debate and securing this debate? And I must say, I do pay tribute to Mary-Fee's tenacity on this issue. I know that she very much has a special interest in this particular issue, and I pay tribute to that. The issue of reoffending and rehabilitation, as I mentioned in last week's debate, is something that I also feel very passionate about. Mary-Fee mentioned in her contribution the through case service being piloted at Greenock Prison, and I think it is indeed a fantastically innovative project which is being piloted there. And I would like to quote from one of the prison, not so much prison officers, but the prison services there as well. And what they say about it, and I know Mary-Fee was at that meeting and when these words were spoken, it mentioned it is widely recognised that offenders frequently find it difficult to successfully return to their communities and avoid reoffending when released from prison. The SPS is continually exploring ways to additionally support prisoners after they are released for the benefit of both offenders and the communities which they return to. I think something very important that it's not just the prisons, the communities and society as a whole which benefits from these fantastic innovative ideas. And the goal of Her Majesty's Prison in Greenock is to sustain the unique relationship, and I think this is one thing that I raised last week's debate as well, which I think is really important, is the relationship which involves between prison officers and prisoners, and they know each other best, I do believe, and that's what it says in this innovative project, that the prison officers get involved in an attempt to build the lives of the prisoners when they are released out into communities, and I think that is a really important thing. And I'm really delighted that all of the agencies, Mary-Fee has mentioned a number of them, government and third sector, are working together, on this fantastic project. Now, Mary-Fee also mentioned, and I really need to mention this too, is the mentoring service, because it's something I do feel passionately about also, and the £7.7 million which has been spent in projects, basically to this mentoring scheme throughout the country, a network of mentoring schemes, and that's obviously to tackle re-offending. And I would like to give also an example from one of those projects, and it's actually in the Greater Glasgow area, my area, and it's called Include 'em in Greater Glasgow. And I won't give any personal details, but I'll just give a couple of sound bites to what actually happened. And this is a chap called Andrew, and his story about how he had been involved for many, many years in and out of prison as a revolving door. And the first thing he said was, if it hadn't been for Include 'em, I'd probably still be fighting and picking up charges. And like Mary-Fee said in her contribution, Andrew came from perhaps what you maybe say, I wouldn't say a dysfunctional background, but a home life which, wasn't the norm as we'd probably see it, and the relationships between himself and his family really suffered through that. And through that, possibly, a young man got involved with gangs, etc., alcohol, and unfortunately got on the wrong side of the fence, the law, whatever way you want to call it. But once he was in prison again, Include 'em became involved, and they actually did a mentoring scheme for him. And since he's been released from prison, he hasn't had any further charges, he hasn't been in trouble at all, and the family all have been helped to get on with their lives. And what Andrew says now is that he's really looking forward to the future. And I think that's something that we have to be proud of in this Parliament, introducing this type of innovative rehabilitation issues, because, as I've said on many, many occasions, we can lock everyone up, but it's no good to them and it's no good to the society out with either. So I really, thank Mary-Fee for bringing forward this motion. I should have congratulated you on your first motion in the Parliament, a very, very worthy one, and I hope that we can all work together, no matter what political party, because it's not about parties, it's about making sure that these people, young people and others, have a life when they come out of prison, and making sure that communities benefit from that life also. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Now call on Lewis MacDonald to be followed by Jackson Carlock. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and I too congratulate Mary-Fee for bringing this important debate today. She is right to highlight the importance of breaking the cycle of reoffending for both offenders and their families, and to put that challenge in a wider context. Mary-Fee is right also to say that there is no single solution to the problem of reoffending, which remains relatively static and far too high. Using the interests and experience of prisoners and engaging with families have to be part of the way forward. There has rightly been concern about the lack of enough purposeful activity in Scotland's prisons. An average of 21 hours a week is simply not acceptable. Hugh Munro was right when he said that this undermined the purpose of sending offenders to prison in the first place. That needs to be addressed, and it is equally vital that this work continues after the offender has been released. Every prison governor and every third sector organisation that I have met has made the same point. Whether released prisoners are sent back to prison for reoffending will depend most on what they do, where they go and what company they keep in the first few days and weeks after their release. That is why prison service support for through care services is vitally important and to be welcomed, and also why agencies like Include 'em and Families Outside are very important too. Because engagement with families is equally critical, as Mary-Fee said. The charity Families Outside has found that offenders are 6 times more likely to reoffend if they lose contact with their families. Support for that contact and linking it to resettlement are clearly therefore of wider benefit. In my own area, achieving that engagement with families will be much harder because of the decision to close Aberdeen Prison and to replace it with a prison an hour away from the city at Peterhead. HMP Grampian has been tasked with being community-facing, and I have no doubt that its first Governor, Jim Farish, and his team will work very hard to fulfil that remit. But it is hard to be community-facing from the other end of the A90. If we are serious about engagement with families, it is not enough to say so, or even to fund pilot projects. The strategic decisions about Scotland's prisons also have to reflect that priority, and in Aberdeen's case, an opportunity has been missed. If family contacts for offenders are critical in general, that is even more true when it comes to young offenders. The lack of purposeful activity has been a particular issue at Polmont and for young offenders at Corton Vale, and I hope this week's announcement with regard to Polmont will produce a significant increase in investment from the Scottish Government. I welcome the engagement of Education Scotland, but when I visited Polmont last year, I was struck by the commitment of staff, but also by the work that was being done in addressing the poor communication skills of many young men who had been imprisoned. Research suggests that 60% of young people who come into contact with the justice system have communication problems. Extra education classes on their own will not work if young offenders are not first enabled to take advantage of them by improving their communication skills. The work done at Polmont is such that it has earned both prison officers and NHS staff the Giving Voice Partnership Award from the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. Yet only 15 hours of one-to-one speech therapy a week are available at Polmont, and that is simply not enough to make a difference to the hundreds of people detained there. This debate is about offenders getting support during and after their imprisonment in order to resettle in their communities. I believe speech therapy is one of the tools that can play an important role in enabling that to happen, and I hope that the Minister, in closing, can indicate that that is also the view of the Scottish Government. Thank you.
Many thanks. Now Colin Jackson-Carlow, to be followed by Colin Keir.
Mary-Fee's first members' debate is a cause well chosen, and I congratulate her on it. And I welcome the opportunity to participate this afternoon on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Her Majesty's Prison Greenock deals with the majority of offenders sentenced in the west of Scotland, and so I am interested in any projects designed to tackle reoffending and help reintegrate offenders into the community. Now, it's clear that much more needs to be done to tackle reoffending. As the motion states, the problem costs the Scottish economy an estimated £3 billion annually. And the Scottish Government is able to say truthfully enough that reconviction rates are at their lowest level for a decade. And this may indeed be true, but the Minister will know that the rates have barely dropped relatively in that time, and we are currently in a situation where over 45% of all prisoners go on to reoffend within a year. The Scottish Government currently spends £128 million a year on reducing reoffending, compared to nearly twice that amount spent punishing offenders. And in this context, I think we must all recognise a £70,000 pilot, while welcome, is obviously a drop in the ocean. Nevertheless, I very much welcome the pilot and commend the Scottish Prison Service for placing greater emphasis on through care services. It's widely acknowledged that offenders find it challenging to successfully return to their communities, and it's perhaps unreasonable to expect an individual who's already been marginalised from society and subsequently locked up to immediately adapt to the realities of finding, crucially in the first instance, housing, a roof over their head, before applying for benefits and hopefully securing employment and release. And of course, we know that many offenders have drug and alcohol problems, which create the additional challenges they then have to face. So the pilot strikes me as common sense. It establishes a point of contact between an offender and a named individual, and importantly manages this transition from prison to release into the community. Currently, through care is routinely available only to offenders on longer sentences, meaning short-term prisoners who are often in and out of prison for the equivalent of a longer sentence slip through the net. And I understand that this pilot will provide support for prisoners who volunteer for the scheme, regardless of their sentence. Now, in some ways, Scotland has some catching up to do. In England and Wales, Chris Grayling has already said that the government there wants all but the highest-risk prisoners to have a dedicated mentor and release from prison. And interestingly, this will use private and voluntary sector groups who are funded on a payment-by-results basis, something I hope the Scottish Government can explore. And as we heard yesterday during the Queen's speech, the UK Government intends to introduce such a scheme in England. And a good place to start would, I think, be to listen to the very detailed interview I heard this morning on Radio 4 with a voluntary project in England who have actually been doing just this and actually have had evaluated success of the initiatives that they have been undertaking. So we will see further legislation to tackle reoffending south of the border, and this will mean all offenders released from prison will receive at least 12 months statutory provision. And this is not to be dismissed on this side as a hug-a-hoodie strategy. Anything which ultimately integrates people back into society, reduces reoffending, is actually what we hope will be a consequence of the system. We must be looking at providing through care services to all prisoners. Yesterday we heard, as has been said by Lewis MacDonald, of an Education Scotland programme to be rolled out at Polmont, which again is to be welcomed. But these projects should be offered across the prison estate alongside other measures to tackle reoffending. Now, on other measures, Scottish Conservatives have been calling for the introduction of a working week for prisoners to better tackle illiteracy and the lack of employable skills amongst offenders. And, of course, finally, we have talked about the end to automatic release, irrespective of whether we at one time introduced it, albeit we were set to repeal it, which my party has long campaigned for. This would mean offenders spend more time in prison being punished, but de facto also more time being rehabilitated before the post-prison mentoring programme we also now advocate. More needs to be done, and I welcome the Scottish Government's acknowledgement of this point and congratulate Mary-Fee on her motion.
Many thanks. Now Colin Keir, to be followed by Hanzala Malik. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I congratulate, obviously, Mrs Fee for securing this debate today, and also a very thoughtful speech as well. Certainly much in this motion is commendable. Mary-Fee has identified one of the major problems in our justice system, that of reoffending by short-term prisoners. This almost revolving door of entry and exit into prison isn't an easy nut to crack, and as the motion concedes, and Lewis MacDonald, I think, mentioned, there's no single solution to the problem. I've been in the fortunate position of sitting on the Justice and Public Audit Committees as the subject of reoffending has been discussed. And I've also had a couple of tours round HM Prison Edinburgh, talking to staff, prisoners, trying to find out their views. It is rather sad that for re-education, working on life skills and preparing prisoners for life on the outside generally, the prisoner really needs to be inside for quite a bit longer than 6 months or a year. The lifestyles of many of these who are serving short-term sentences when they had their freedom are usually very chaotic. Drug and alcohol dependency, as Jackson Carlow pointed out, a lack of literacy and numeracy skills will prove to be an impediment to those prisoners who would benefit from some form of education and training. You really need time to work with these prisoners on the underlying problems before you can even think about such things as vocational courses, either within or outside prison. This is really where the problems of short-term prison sentences come in, and nowhere in the prison system that I've seen is anyone saying that you can provide effective training for someone doing a sentence of, say, 6 months. It isn't just that in some cases there may be a resource issue at the prison, it's just the fact there isn't enough time to actually work effectively with the prisoner. There is also the fact that some prisoners have no interest in attending educational courses as a result of hating their school days. It was these prisoners who the staff at HM Prison Edinburgh had real difficulty engaging with, actually getting them into classrooms. And it reminds me of the old saying of better one volunteer than 10 press men. On my trips around HM Edinburgh with David McLetchie, we saw some excellent examples of training and educational opportunities. But these skills will be lost if there's no opportunity to expand their knowledge and skill set when they walk through the gates to freedom. Prisoners require help when they're released. There's no point in releasing a prisoner at 5 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, particularly if that prisoner is not local to the area and has nowhere to sleep. They're likely to be met by the local drug dealer at the prison door or end up looking for help from those so-called friends who were part of their life before imprisonment and most likely encouraged them into crime. So chances are they'll be back inside the cell by the end of the weekend. No amount of retraining or education is going to really help this situation. In the opinion of many, the answers to these questions lie not just inside but outside prison as well. Local authorities, third sector and voluntary organisations all have a part to play in the procedures. Many of the problems faced by short-term offenders can be dealt with by using nothing more than common sense. And on release, a prisoner should have access to accommodation, be registered with a GP surgery, and have a knowledge of who they speak to for information and advice. Prisoners, if they're to be reintegrated into society, need self-respect. And I've seen and met examples in my own constituency of those who have seen a path to prison from their school days. Now, if that isn't a depressing thought, I don't know what is. Education at an appropriate level for each prisoner will always be the key. Otherwise, we'll endure this ever-turning revolving door of prisoners who look on an 18-month sentence as nothing more than an inconvenience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now Colin Hanzala Malik, after which we'll move to the Minister for the closing speech.
Good afternoon, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the opportunity to speak in today's members' debate and congratulate Mary-Fee on securing today's debate on reducing reoffending. Audit Scotland reported in November 2012 stating that reoffending rates have been relatively static over the past decade. That to me sounds very uneasy. I feel very uneasy when I hear that, because it suggests that there's been no improvement over the last decade. Because it says that 30% of offenders re-offend within 1 year. So the fact that there's been static for a decade and 30% are re-offending, where have we failed them? One of the most striking comments of the report was, and I quote, "There is a mismatch between what is currently being delivered and what is known to be effective." So we know what's effective, but we're not actually doing anything about it. And that in itself also rings alarm bells that, why have we failed so far? One of the major recommendations of the report was that calls for more flexibility to meet local needs and priorities. I hope that the project in Her Majesty's Prison Greenock will go on to meet local needs of prisoners and their families. Engaging with families, I believe, is important because many sometimes abandon their families because of shame, stigma, whatever may be the issue. The cost of reoffending in Scotland's economy was valued at approximately £3 billion a year, but we cannot calculate the real costs in money, but in social deprivation or the society's shortcomings because of these issues. The use of prisoner assets to fund programmes, in a way, in getting extra resources, but the quality of the programmes is much more important, I believe. Mary-Fee is correct in highlighting the role of families and friends that should be put in place in a bid to support ex-offenders. To benefit from families and friends is important. It ensures opportunities of getting re-offenders support that has been missing for a very long time. I also want to make a point for people from minority communities. In minority communities, historically, anybody that has been in prison have a far greater level of stigma attached to it. Families are in denial. They won't accept the fact that a member of their family has been in prison. And the usual excuse for someone not being around is, oh, he's gone home visiting relatives, and that could be anywhere in the world. And whilst that may be a good excuse at the time, they do their kin no justice. If someone has found themselves in difficulties, have offended and been prosecuted and been incarcerated, they need support, they need help, and therefore I would suggest that not only do they emphasise this in their families to support them, but also agencies looking out for people, particularly from minority communities, and particularly those who have been first-time offenders, to try to ensure that they re-engage them in society so that they can play their role in full. I'm grateful for Mary-Fee for bringing this topic today, because I have known some prisoners historically myself as a counsellor, and I have to say that where I have found people to have received support have in fact benefited by it. So I wish the prison and everybody surrounding the project the very best of success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now move the closing speech from the Minister, Rosanna Cunningham. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I congratulate Mary-Fee on obtaining her first members' debate. It's clearly appropriate on this subject. I know she's very tenacious on this issue. I also know that she's going to be meeting the Cabinet Secretary quite soon, as well as the Chief Executive of Scottish Prison Service. So I'm expecting that she'll be back in the Chamber with further comments to make on this area. She's raising important issues in a thoughtful way, and I think it's very helpful that she does so. And can I also thank members for their own thoughtful contributions to this important debate. Now, Mary-Fee, in her motion and in her speech, rightly welcomed the £70,000 investment at HMP Greenock this year, to pilot a new approach to through care services. Other members, such as Sandra White and Hanzala Malik, have also welcomed and acknowledged the good work done there. So I know that the Chamber will be delighted to hear that this investment will increase to £1.3 million next year for the construction of 2 new community integration units, one for men and one for women. So the work is being built upon. And I think that that's very important, because we do know that purpose, meaning and positive family relationships are important assets in anyone's life. It doesn't matter who we are, but they're particularly important in shaping and supporting new beginnings for people leaving prison. Mary-Fee referenced the debate around meaningful or purposeful activity, and one or two other members have also raised it. So I do agree with the Justice Committee's report published on 28 March that purposeful activity in prisons is an important part of rehabilitation. It can give work ethic and structure to the day. It gives people the chance to build and enhance existing skills and hobbies, and better prepare them for rejoining our communities in a way that gives them the best chance of making a positive contribution and of staying away from future crime. I think we do know, and although I don't have the statistics to hand, that those people that leave prison and go on to find work are the group of people who are least likely then to go on and reoffend. So I think it is quite important that we see that link goes all the way through. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to reducing reoffending. We're all individuals. Our approach to offenders' rehabilitation, whether that be in custody or in the community, needs to be person-centred, linked to that individual need, and one that builds on the strengths and assets of offenders. And I think Mary-Fee is quite right to remind us that the word asset doesn't always have to mean money, because it's also about the assets an individual can bring to this, and they are often overlooked in all of this debate. The vital work, however, can't be the sole responsibility of the criminal justice system, because it isn't just for the criminal justice system in terms of the wider services. It is crucial that we work with offenders as soon as they're in custody. Lewis MacDonald and others, including Jackson Carlaw, rightly raised the problem, however, of services available after release. Much of the support and many of the services that are needed, they need to have in place were rightly mentioned, I think, by Jackson Carlaw, such as suitable housing, timely access to addiction services, which of course is of particular concern to me as a Minister responsible for drugs policy, and that needs to be planned and met by services on the other side of the prison gate. So there has historically been a joining up issue that needs to be overcome, and that's why the whole through care issue is extremely important for us to begin highlighting. Services in our communities are going to be vital to all of this. But that does also mean communities understanding that they have a broader role to play too. And I think when Hanzala Malik spoke of the stigma attaching to people from particular minority backgrounds, the truth is that that kind of stigma can attach to all people leaving prison and can make it quite difficult for them to be reintegrated to communities. So there's a bit of community learning about this as well, which I think is quite a kind of difficult discussion that can take place in some areas, but it's an important one that we do have. But it does mean that those who are working in mental health services, in addiction services, in employment and in housing all do also have a fundamental role to play. They have to open their doors as well. It's crucial that the whole of the public sector accepts its part in the rehabilitation of offenders, and I will come back to Jackson Carlaw's comments about what's happening south of the border, if I may. Lewis MacDonald specifically asked about speech therapy. Some of that work is already taking place in Polmont. The Government does recognise the need for specialist interventions where appropriate, and part of the approach, that's part of the approach being developed to create a skills and learning environment in Polmont. Colin Keir, I think, rightly flagged up some of the challenges that exist around short sentences, for example, because you're dealing with people who might not be in prison for a very long time, and it can be difficult to put in place meaningful interventions in very short prison sentences. Unfortunate release dates, times. We've all heard the anecdotal stories. We know it happens. So these are important things that we've got to take on board and addressed. Jackson Carlaw, this is where I come back to the public sector, private sector, commended the approach of the UK Government in this area. We are, as he might expect, open to constructive suggestions from elsewhere, wherever that elsewhere might be. But I need to gently point out to the Chamber that the Payment by Results programme was introduced after only a 6-week consultation, and it is receiving widespread criticism. So, if he will pardon the pun, the jury is currently out on it. Yes, of course.
I understand. This government has been happy to embrace new ideas which perhaps haven't had a welter of evidence underpinning them too in public health issues. But it is a new initiative. I wonder if she might just take the time to hear the interview that took place this morning with the voluntary organisation down south who have been implementing this, who have actually had it evidence-based tested and do believe that it has worked.
I think I'm about to have 35 seconds left in my speech, so I'm not going to be able to do that this morning. A number of people commended rightly the Change Fund that's been introduced, the financial commitment to that, the mentoring service that has been acknowledged and recognised by everybody. We're also working with the Scottish Prison Service in Edinburgh, Perth, Cornwall and Greenock to improve the way short-term prisoners' needs are identified, because that's important, as we've indicated. And as the Minister in charge of drugs policy, the prevalence of substance misuse and the very particular problems that creates on exit are also a very live matter that I discuss on a regular basis, because we still haven't got that completely right. Part of our answer to that is the naloxone programme, but it can't be the only answer. I do recognise that. So it is important. Can I close just with a few comments to commend the work of Jim Kerr, the Governor of HMP Greenock, and his staff, who are piloting this whole new approach for prison officers. These support officers are going to provide holistic case management for short-term offenders, working with them to create a plan for release. We are all behind this project. We all want to make it work. We all want to see if this is something that we can introduce more widely. I think it's extremely important. The outcome of that pilot will provide lessons for us to learn from and will inform any rollout of the approach across the prison estate. It's been an interesting and thought-provoking debate. Thank you, Presiding Officer, for your forbearance in me taking a few extra seconds, and I thank all members for their contributions.
Many thanks. And I now suspend this meeting until 2:30 this afternoon.